The technology changes today are at such a rapid pace that if you don't understand how that's going to impact your business, you could be left behind. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm thinking about over the next few years.
Lee, thank you very much
Thank you,
for
Gustavo.
being here. Pleasure. I have the pleasure to meet you every year here in St Moritz. I've been coming here for a few years already.
Yeah, I think I've been here for 17 years in a row.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yes.
so quite a bit.
Quite a bit. And we always like to talk about what's going on in the real estate market. I see St Moritz as a way for us to set the scene for the year. But before we go there, would you mind sharing with our audience who you are and your company information, what you guys doing currently in the world?
Thank you very much. My name is Lee Timmins. I am the founder and CEO of a firm called Atlas, Atlas Realty and Development now. This is a business I set up about 30 some years ago for Heinz and in Eastern Europe. And after the conflict began with Russian-Ukraine conflict, I bought the business for Eastern Europe from Heinz and rebranded as Atlas, although I'm still partners with Heinz in our businesses in India and the Middle East. So I'm still working kind of as a senior consultant for Heinz, but the business I own is called Atlas.
Fantastic. Let me ask you something quite basic. Why real estate? How you found yourself involved with real estate? Do you remember that?
I absolutely do remember it. It was my university education. I was a business major, but I loved architecture, and I started taking some architecture classes just for the non-professional architect, and loved the whole idea about design, high quality design. And I began seeing in Texas. I was at University of Texas at the time. There was a man named Gerald Hines who was doing these amazing architectural monuments in Houston, and then beyond that, New York, many places around the United States, and then ultimately in Europe. And I thought, this is interesting. So I reached out to actually a mutual friend and who worked for Hines, and I interviewed there, and they hired me. And I worked for Hines for 35 years, ending up on our board of directors. And then my next round was buying part of the business I set up for Hines.
Fantastic journey. And when you look back, the reason why you enter real estate, how does that still dialogue with who you are, the leader you are now, and your influence in real estate, the architecture part of the business, the structuring? What keeps you going nowadays with so many investments in different parts of the world?
Yeah, well, I think for me, and I said this to my son recently, that it's all of the act of creation. It's the idea of seeing a piece of land and thinking, what can we build there? What is possible? And that whole idea about having a concept, taking the risk on that, hiring world-class architects, working with them to do the design phase. And to me, that's the most enjoyable part. Like, for example, with my Indian team, I love the idea of having world-class architects that we work on creating exactly the right building or buildings at exactly the right location, finding the way to capitalize that, construct it, lease it, and then ultimately make hopefully a very successful return on that property. So that's the thing that turns me on every day.
Exciting. Now, you had a lot of experience to have seen different cycles in the real estate industry globally. We were just speaking here in the beginning of the event about the current landscape for the real estate players, for you guys to operate. And I can talk about artificial intelligence, the geopolitical tensions, interest rates, risk of recession. Do you think this is one of the most complicated landscape, or you are comfortable operating in such an environment?
I think back about my business, and I began in the early 80s, and I think I've been through 5 or 6 major market corrections, savings and loan crisis, inflation crisis, there are all sorts of things that always impact our business, whether it's the change of e-commerce affecting retail or the work from home affecting offices. There's always something, and there's something today. So, I mean, there is issues out there today, risks that we will encounter, but I think human ingenuity has the ability to react to those disruptions, and I think we will be able to react to them. You have to play it very smartly, though. I think inflation is going to be a serious risk, in my opinion, around the world. I think that will be an issue. AI will have an impact. We're building a lot of projects in India right now, and so the question one investor asked me is, Well, how is that going to affect? What happens if AI displaces all of this offshoring that's going to India? So those are issues that we have to think about. How do you play that? How do you build the right building to respond to those sets of risks? And I think that it's no different than it has been for 40 years. There's always some risk, and you always have to react to those risks.
Which means experience plays a big role in the current scenario for sure. Now, if you have to look back in your career, your decades of experience, and choose one main lesson that you have learned, what's the main lesson you have learned that you would like to share?
It's an interesting question. I was thinking about this recently, that particularly in the era of COVID and following that, there seemed to be a lot of places in the world where they try to eliminate risk. And I think that's a big mistake, because in our business, you are always taking risks, but you're taking measured risks. So from my perspective, if you take, for example, the housing market and the housing affordability crisis, what does that really mean? That means that governments are trying to put too many controls to eliminate risks and create constraints on our business. And so as a result, we're not building enough housing units, which creates affordability crisis, which creates a political crisis. And we're seeing that unfold in many places in the world. So boiling it down to one statement is, take measured risks, do a risk reward analysis, and do not step away from risk, because there are always risks. It's how you manage those risks that will generate one's success in the world. And I think that's the main lesson that I've learned.
Very good. Now, thinking about the next 10 years, what do you think will be the game changer, the biggest game changer? Technology, behavior, capital, anything else?
I think I just came from an AI session, and the reason I attended the AI session is I'm trying to understand how that will really impact our business. How is it going to impact the hundreds of people we have working in the property management sphere? How is it going to impact the architectural business of designing buildings? How is it going to impact the speed at which you have to develop things? How is it going to impact the locational aspects? I mean, for example, there are a lot of, technology booms and AI boom that may happen more in the United States than it is in Europe, may happen in the Middle East, may happen in India. I think the technology changes today are at such a rapid pace that if you don't understand how that's going to impact your business, you could be left behind. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm thinking about over the next few years.
Now, there are a lot of changes happening in the real estate industry and in the world. And sometimes we just look back after a few years and said, how nobody saw that coming. Is there anything that you believe that we're still doing a certain way in real estate that in the future, we're going to look back and say, you know what, that was quite obvious, but nobody saw that? Is there anything that you think that could be transformational, that we should be talking more about and we are not talking enough about?
Ooh, it's an interesting question. I think that the nature of what we build will always change. For example, when we were building offices in the United States, you had a certain location, a certain floor plate, a certain use of number of employees per square feet or square meters. But that is completely different in a different market. And so I think the physical aspect of what changes. What will a fulfillment center for Amazon look like? It was very different 5 years ago, and it's different going forward. So I think that the obvious nature of where people want to be, where they can work effectively because of technology, where they will choose to work, where they'll choose and how they'll choose to be entertained, I think all of that will change. And just adding one more thing on the entertainment part, I think our retail, and we have some various retail projects that we build, is going to fundamentally change. There's going to be a lot more experiential aspect about that, because people are looking for experiences, not necessarily another thing to buy. They're looking for an experience, whether it's food and beverage or some other experience. That's going to change. And I think the shopping center of the future is going to look very, very different from the shopping center of 5 or 10 years ago. And it will become more obvious in the future as we see this unfold.
Final question. You travel a lot. You have business in different parts of the world. Is there any specific region that, you see with special eyes nowadays?
I see what's happening in the Emirates and the Middle East, and particularly in places like UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, as exciting. Every time I go there, you get the feeling that everything the government is trying to do is make business easier and more effective. And there are not that many constraints, whether it's constraints in regulation, tax policies, et cetera. And I think other parts of the world, like Europe or certain parts of the United States, where the government is placing significant constraints on business, how long it takes you to get a permit for a data center, or how long it takes you to get a permit to build housing in Los Angeles. I think governments of the West had better wake up and look at the examples of earlier generations of places like Singapore. Now it's probably the Emirates or the Middle East. They ought to wake up and see that is the future. And if they don't change their policies, I think there's going to be some real stresses in places like which have a much heavier regulatory and tax burden in the world.
Completely agree with you. And I have the same feeling every time I go to the region. Lee, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you. And pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.